This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
On November the 24th, 1971, at 8:12 p.m., 10,000 feet above southwestern Washington state, a man forced open the rear doorway of a commercial airliner. Buffeted by winds gusting in excess of 200 miles per hour, he stood briefly on a rear stairwell. The man, known only as D.B. Cooper, leapt into space in the unknown. The last flight and strange disappearance of D.B. Cooper is one of the most baffling cases of this century. Many, including the FBI, believe he must have perished when he leapt from a 727 at 10,000 feet. Others disagree. They say he made it. Tonight, we will recreate D.B. Cooper's last flight and examine two other cases. In one, an $8 million collection of sports memorabilia has disappeared. Among the treasures was Babe Ruth's uniform. In the other, two teenage boys lay motionless in the path of an onrushing train. Their parents believe they were murdered. Join me. You may be able to help solve a mystery. To some, D.B. Cooper is a skyjacking mastermind behind a daring crime that defied both the elements and the authorities. To most of us, he's nothing more than a common criminal who risked the lives of 42 innocent people for $200,000. But one fact remains. Nobody knows whether D.B. Cooper is dead or alive. Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. At 2 p.m., D.B. Cooper walked into the Portland airport.
He was your typical businessman, a suit, tie, a raincoat, carrying an attaché case. Nothing distinctive about him except perhaps for the fact that everything was very dark. Black tie, black raincoat, black shoes.
Cooper.
He appeared at the ticket counter, bought his ticket, just gave the name Cooper.
By the way, is that a 727?
Yes, sir, it is. It'll be $20, please.
The 727 became notorious through this case because it is the only airliner from which a successful parachute jump can be made from the passenger cabin.
Flight 305 non-stop service to Seattle is now ready for boarding.
Cooper had purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle. The only luggage he carried was an attaché case.
Thank you, sir. You have a good flight now.
Flight 305, 727 jet service nonstop from Portland to Seattle, Washington.
He was the last person to board the plane and took his seat while the 727 began its taxi to the runway. Florence Schaffner was the first crew member to talk to Cooper.
You'll need to put this under your front seat, please.
He handed me a note, and he kept looking at me. And I just ignored him the first time he looked at me, and then he said, "I want you to read the note." It was printed, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit beside me."
This is no joke. There's a bomb in here.
I saw a big battery with 6 dynamite sticks wrapped around the battery. And he said to me, all I have to do is attach this wire to this gadget here, and we'll all be dead.
She saw the bomb, so we know it's for real.
Yeah.
Florence went to the cockpit to inform the crew about Cooper and his threat.
Can you handle it?
Yeah. Tina, he's the guy in the very back. He's all dressed
We
in
were
black.
very, very scared to death. All of us were. I was thinking about dying. That's all I thought. I was also thinking I'll never see my parents, my brothers and sisters.
Scotty, we call headquarters?
Yes, Bill, go ahead and go ahead.
The flight crew immediately notified air traffic control about the hijacking.
305, we have a hijack in progress.
They, in turn, contacted the FBI.
Okay, I gave the captain your demands.
Did you tell him $200,000 cash, small bills?
Yes, I told him
4
small
parachutes.
bills.
He wanted $200,000 in cash in a knapsack and 4 parachutes. Identified the parachutes as 2 front pack parachutes and 2 backpacks, and he specified that the airliner remain in the air until the money and the parachutes were ready at Seattle. He also specified that the other passengers not be told that the airplane was being hijacked.
Can I get you something to drink?
The flight crew proceeded as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Drinks were served. Cooper ordered 2 bourbon and waters.
The FBI asked the airline what their approach to the hijacking was going to be. That is, did they wish to pay the ransom? This is an option that the victim of an extortion has rather than law enforcement. And they responded instantly. They wished to pay the ransom. And so the FBI at Seattle set about assisting in obtaining the money.
Each bill was photographed and the serial numbers recorded. Cooper also insisted the plane be immediately refueled upon landing in Seattle. No passengers were to be released until all of his demands were met.
Flight 305, Seattle, Tacoma. We've just been informed the money and the chutes have arrived.
The hijacker instructed that they land, but that they stay on the runway rather than to taxi up to the terminal.
Okay, anti-skid checks.
Check.
Hydraulics check, gear.
At 5:43 p.m., Flight 305 landed at the Seattle airport. The plane taxied in and parked in a remote area of the field.
The money and the parachutes were brought by an FBI agent to the airplane. They were carried on board by the flight attendant. There were 10,000 $20 bills assembled in straps of 100 bills to a strap and individual straps held together with rubber bands. The money alone, just the currency, weighed 21 pounds.
Four parachutes were delivered, but the authorities and the skyjacker were unaware that one of the parachutes was defective. It would not open under any circumstances.
All right, that's 2. Where's the other 2?
They're right out back.
Get them up here.
Both the flight crew and the FBI were worried that Cooper would use the 4 parachutes to take hostages along with him. But the passengers on board were oblivious to what was going on. Though annoyed at the delay, they remained calm, unaware of the drama surrounding them.
During the time the airliner was on the ground at Seattle, there were FBI agents with scoped rifles who were prepared, if the indications were present, that required it to pick him off.
He was very, very uptight, suspicious. He said to us to pull down the shade. Every shade must be down, so I did and Tina did.
They seem to be having trouble with getting fuel on the aircraft. And we thought, well, maybe they're delaying it. And we said, we don't want any delay. And at this time, the hijacker seemed to be getting real shook up. So we told him on the ground, if you're trying to delay us with any of these kind of tactics, let's get with it and get the fuel on, which they finally did.
We apologize for
Finally, the passengers were allowed to deplane, but Cooper demanded that the flight crew and 1 flight attendant stay on board.
The co-pilot said, "You better get the hell out now." So I left without Tina. And that's when he decided to keep her because he was getting suspicious at everything.
The passengers were met by FBI agents. Only then did they realize that their lives had been in mortal danger. When debriefed, they could remember nothing about the man with the attaché case.
All right, listen up, Captain.
Cooper
want
ordered
you
the
to hold
pilot
this
to fly
plane
from
at
Seattle to
10,000
Mexico
feet.
City at a height of 10,000 feet and a speed of 200 miles per hour.
15 degrees.
Under these conditions, the 727 would have to refuel along the way. Cooper agreed to stop and refuel in Reno, Nevada. He then made an unusual request.
And I want the back stairwell down.
Well, we're checking with the company.
The pilot explained that he wasn't able to take off with that door open, and they argued back and forth, and finally the pilot said he just couldn't fly the airplane and wasn't going to try, and the hijacker consented for the door to be closed for takeoff, which it was.
At 7:37 p.m., Flight 305 took off. The Seattle control tower alerted all other aircraft in the area to remain clear, so the 727 had the sky to itself. The weather had deteriorated, with a storm front directly in the plane's flight path.
I want you to get up there with your flyboard.
He told her to go back into the cockpit and to close the curtain between the coach and the first-class cabins. And as she turned around to close the curtains, she said she saw him tying something to his waist with what she thought was rope. Later, in the cockpit, the light flashed indicating that the hijacker was attempting to operate the door. At 8:12, the pilot told us that they were experiencing a rapid change in the air pressure reflected in a ears-popping experience.
Somewhere over the forests of southern Washington state, Cooper jumped. He has never been seen since. Since D.B. Cooper's hijacking, all 727s have been modified so that the rear door cannot be opened during a flight. When we return, we'll reveal an important new clue to the identity of D.B. Cooper. No one can be certain if D.B. Cooper survived his jump from 10,000 feet. On the aircraft, he left no identifiable fingerprints, no personal items, no clue to his identity. D.B. Cooper seems to have vanished from the face of the earth. Upon landing in Reno, Nevada, every inch of the 727 was scrutinized for clues as to D.B. Cooper's real identity. The flight attendants who had seen Cooper up close created a composite drawing of his face. Flight 305 flew along this path on its way to Reno. The crew felt that Cooper had jumped somewhere near the southern tip of Washington state. For that reason, it was believed that Cooper would be found in this area, bordered by Lake Merwin to the north and ending 20 miles north of Portland, Oregon. No matter where Cooper landed, Frank Heil believes he could have survived.
Let's say he went down in the water. You've got to know how to manage that parachute. You can use it for some flotation. Now, his life expectancy is not going to be very long in that water. It's cold. You have to think of the time of the year it was in, so he had probably very, very few minutes to get on shore. But I think he could have done this.
A large white object had been reported floating in Lake Merwin. Divers repeatedly explored its depths, but found nothing.
My feeling is he would have been hurt regardless of what he landed into. I think that Cooper most likely crawled to a creek. He didn't have any water supplies, didn't bring any along with him, and he would have had to have water to survive. So I assume he made his way to a little creek and perished there.
Some feel that Cooper could not have survived in that rugged terrain, dressed only in a business suit.
We don't know what he wore under the suit. Could have had a pair of long underwear on, which he certainly should have had. And what he had in his pockets may have been the most important thing, because this would have given him the tools of survival. As long as a man's got a knife, a cigarette lighter, and the clothes on his back, he could have lived indefinitely out there. Could do it. It's possible. I think he buried the chute. I think he probably buried the briefcase. He got rid of that. I think he probably put the money in his coat, and I think he headed for a big city someplace and lost himself.
The search for D.B. Cooper continued, but no new clues were discovered. 7 years passed. Then in November of 1978, a hunter deep in the Washington forest discovered a plastic placard from a 727. It had been ripped from the lower stairwell of Flight 305. 15 months later, an even more dramatic discovery was made.
Run up there and just clear a spot off for a fire.
On February 10th, 1980, a family was preparing a barbecue on the shore of the Columbia River, 165 miles south of Seattle and 20 miles southwest of Cooper's supposed jump point. They planned on digging a fire pit, but dug up something else. The bills, totaling $5,880, were waterlogged and deteriorated.
There were 294 bills found, and all of those serial numbers are on the ransom list, so that money is definitely, positively identified as having come from that particular ransom money.
Money was found. If they'd have found $200,000, I'd have said, hey, it's all over. He's out there, he's dead. Now we've got some real proof. But they did not find $200,000. Where's the rest of the money? That's what I want to know.
He risked his life to hijack the airliner. He didn't get to spend the money. He may have lost his life. Now, I don't know that he lost his life, but I think there's a very good chance that he did. None of the money, not one bill, has ever turned up in circulation.
Could D.B. Cooper have struck again? Only 5 months after Cooper's flight, in April of 1972, $500,000 was extorted from another airline by another skyjacker. The crime was remarkably similar to the Cooper skyjacking. His name was Richard McCoy, a former Green Beret skydiver. He was sentenced to 45 years for air piracy, but escaped and was tracked down and killed in a gun battle with the FBI. Due to the resemblance between their pictures, some believe that D.B. Cooper and Richard McCoy are the same man. Florence Schaffner, however, believes the composite of Cooper may be inaccurate.
The composite never really looked like him. The hair does not look like him. The face does not look like him.
Okay. I've added a little bit of eyelid up here because it really
At the request of Unsolved Mysteries, Florence worked with Malin Coleman, a forensic artist from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Together, they created a new portrait of D.B. Cooper.
Wide forehead. It's still strong in my mind. Okay, narrow face. I remember everything. The color of his eyes, the color of his eyebrows, and his features.
What do you think of that?
Yeah. That's it.
Last May, we examined the case of Diane Broadbeck, a Pennsylvania housewife and mother of 2, whose charity work led her to exchange letters of friendship with convicted killer John Yount. Yount, a former high school math teacher, was sentenced to life in prison in 1966 for the brutal murder of a teenage girl. Broadbeck and Yount's friendship gradually grew into a romance. On April 5th, 1986, John Yount escaped from prison, and on the same day, Diane Broadbeck disappeared.
I know my daughter. She would not deliberately help a convicted murderer escape from prison.
Yes, I think that my wife probably did help John Yount get out of jail under pressure. For what reason, I don't know.
Update. John Yount and Diane Broadbeck have been captured. 2 of our viewers in Boise, Idaho, recognized Broadbeck as a former co-worker, Kathy Kerman.
When they showed the picture, it was Kathy's face, obviously. And once they said she was a bank manager and it was from Massachusetts, and they said that John's background was in computers, it was a dead giveaway.
The Humphreys called the FBI, and after a month-long investigation, the fugitive couple was arrested at their home. In the pre-dawn hours of August 23, 1987, a 75-car, 6,000-ton cargo train made its regular night run to Little Rock, Arkansas. The train was over a mile long and was traveling at a speed of 52 miles per hour. So far, the run had been clear sailing as engineer Stephen Schroyer approached the small town of Bryant, Arkansas.
Jumping on the rail up there, you see that?
Suddenly, Schroyer saw something in his path. He couldn't tell what it was. As his train drew closer,
Yeah, it's a couple of bodies.
he made the horrifying discovery that 2 boys were lying motionless across the railroad tracks.
From the time that we had placed the train into an emergency position and laid down on the horn, I would estimate about 3 to 5 seconds to impact. And that may not sound like a very long period of time, but when you're bearing down on a couple of children, it's an eternity, honestly.
Despite the engineer's frantic emergency stop, the weight of the heavy cargo train carried it for a full half mile. The boys' bodies were terribly mangled. The 2 boys were identified as 16-year-old Don Henry and 17-year-old Kevin Ives, best friends and popular seniors at the Bryant, Arkansas High School. It is extraordinary that Kevin and Don lay on the tracks without moving a muscle, while a huge freight train was hurtling towards them, blaring its emergency horn. The state medical examiner said the boys had been under the influence of marijuana, and he ruled the deaths accidental. Don and Kevin's parents could not accept that ruling. They began a crusade to find out what really happened and to salvage the reputation of their sons.
Well, I couldn't believe that Kevin was knocked out on marijuana or into any kind of heavy drugs, anything like that, because I was home a lot during the day when Kevin come in from school and Linda was here at nights, and we'd never seen him in a state that he even act like he was, you know, spaced out or however you want to phrase it. I just couldn't see any signs that he was into any kind of heavy drugs or any kind of really drugs at all.
Kevin and Don were both typical teenage boys. They loved to work on their cars. They loved to hunt. Don was a natural comedian, and Kevin was his best audience. Most weekends, the 2 double-dated. However, on the night of Saturday, August 22nd, 1987, Kevin and Don met a group of friends on the outskirts of Little Rock at a favorite gathering place for the local teenagers. The 2 boys left around midnight to go back to Don's house. Kevin waited on the porch while Don went inside to talk to his father.
And he came in approximately 12:15. Came to the bedroom and told me where he was going and everything, you know. I told him just be careful, and he took one of my spotlights with him, took his 22. And we talked for approximately 15 minutes before he left.
You ready? Let's go. All right. Where do you want to go?
The 2 boys set off to go spotlighting, a form of night hunting which is illegal in Arkansas. One of them would shine a light in the animal's eyes, transfixing the prey while the other fired. Spotlighting was a fairly widespread activity among the local boys. So far, Kevin and Don had avoided being caught. That night, the boys chose their usual hunting ground, along the railroad tracks that ran behind Don's house.
I never was even concerned, you know, worried about him when he was in the woods, hunting. Because I never realized you could get in trouble hunting.
It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. 3 hours later, Stephen Schroyer's locomotive came speeding down Bryant Hill.
When we were about 6 poles away from it, my conductor yelled out, "Big hole." I immediately recognized what we saw. It looked like
like a body morgue. They were just laid out.
The boys were lying exactly parallel on the tracks, their arms straight down by their sides. They were partially covered by a light green tarp. Lying parallel to both of them was Don's .22 rifle. Neither boy was moving.
And I started laying down on the diesel horn, and I got no reaction, none at all, not so much as a flinch. And we just passed over.
What had caused the two boys to lie side by side on the railroad tracks? The state medical examiner concluded they had smoked the equivalent of 20 marijuana cigarettes. He determined that Kevin and Don had been in a deep sleep induced by the drug and had never heard the oncoming train. He ruled their death an accident. Don and Kevin's parents would not accept the medical examiner's conclusion.
If they were that stoned, how did they lay down in identical positions? That was my immediate reaction to his ruling.
We checked the train and it was 98 decibels, which is equal to a jackhammer and air compressor running. I don't think that no one can sleep through that kind of noise. And another thing too, my son's gun, it was laying on gravel. I know my son too well. He would not lay it on gravel. He wouldn't take a chance on the wood getting scratched.
We hired a private investigator to trying to find out what happened. Every time he would try to find out something, it seemed like he would meet resistance from different authorities and everything, and we weren't getting anywhere.
5 months after their sons were killed, Don and Kevin's parents held a press conference. They hoped to force the authorities to reopen the investigation.
Would you like to give up your son and everybody think they was smoked up and laid down, passed out? No, I don't think anyone wants to give up their kid unless that is honestly proved to be the truth. Then you have to accept it. At this point, it has not been proved to us.
The day after their press conference, the investigation was officially reopened. Newly appointed prosecutor Richard Garrett had the boys' bodies exhumed for a second autopsy to be performed by a noted expert. This doctor concluded that together, the boys had smoked not 20, but between 1 and 3 marijuana cigarettes. He also found evidence to indicate that one boy was already dead and one unconscious when the train hit them. In July of 1988, a grand jury reversed the medical examiner's original finding of accidental death and officially ruled the boys' deaths probable homicides. Prosecutor Garrett then focused on the green tarp. Neither boy owned such a tarp. Who had covered them with it, and why?
All 4 of the people on the train who were able to observe the scene prior to the accident stated that the boys were partially covered by a green tarp.
See what you can find. I'll go ahead and call it in.
Police who searched the scene later denied that engineer Schroyer had even told them about the tarp.
They even questioned its existence. That, to me, would be like questioning the existence of the boys on the track.
Yeah, they were covered up with a tarp.
Because what's real is real and what's not is not. And that's, it was there as well as the boys.
I can understand 2 people laying down on a railroad track. I can understand 2 people laying down and cover themselves up with a tarp. Where would the tarp come from? I am convinced that the tarp existed. The tarp, however, was never found.
The ensuing investigation unearthed an intriguing lead. 1 week before the boys were killed, a man wearing military fatigues had been spotted in the vicinity. His behavior had aroused suspicion, and when police officer Danny Allen stopped to question him, the man opened fire.
I got up from the seat, the subject was gone. And 5 minutes later, Saline County showed up and we searched the area and never found the subject.
On the night Kevin and Don died, witnesses again reported seeing a man in military fatigues. This time he was leaving town, heading down a road less than 200 yards from the spot where the boys' bodies were run over. Police have been unable to locate him. 6 weeks after the investigation was reopened, Richard Garrett came up with a strangely similar case. In Hudgon, Oklahoma, just 200 miles west of Little Rock, two young men lying together on the railroad tracks had been run over by a locomotive in 1984. They were lying motionless on the tracks in a position nearly identical to Kevin and Don's.
I think that someone took these boys' lives. They incapacitated one of the boys and then felt like they had to do something to the other one. And then to cover their tracks, laid the boys on the railroad track and covered them up with a tarp. The reason why they did that, I'm not sure. What I'm hunting for is the reason why they did it. I've never carried a gun in my life, but since we've started working on this thing, I am carrying a gun. Because I do feel like that my life could be in danger at some point in time.
Whatever it takes, however long it takes. As long as there is anything to investigate, as long as there is anything to work on, we'll do it.
Hundreds of times I've been out there day and night just trying to get it in my mind of what could have happened or what did happen. I've been out there at night to see how far you can see the train, how far you can hear the train, how loud is the train. I basically think that they walked up on something that they was not supposed to see. They was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I know in my own mind that they was murdered and put there.
Since we filmed this story, Don Henry's T-shirt has been analyzed by an expert pathologist. Tears in the fabric indicate that Don had been stabbed before he was run over by the train. In light of this new evidence, the grand jury changed its ruling from probable homicide to definite homicide. Next, a curious footnote to the legend of Babe Ruth. His uniform, long displayed as a priceless sports treasure, has been stolen, along with other sports memorabilia worth $8 million. In 1927, legendary Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs, a record that stood for over 30 years. Today, his 1927 World Series ring is valued at $50,000. It has disappeared. In 1956, Mickey Mantle had the most home runs and the best batting average of any player in the game. Today, Mantle's 1956 World Series uniform is valued at $15,000. It has disappeared. Pete Rose, a hometown boy from Cincinnati, has more hits than any player in the history of the game. Rose's silver bat is worth $30,000. It, too, has disappeared. At conventions across the country, millions of avid collectors have made baseball memorabilia a multi-million-dollar business. One of the most ardent of these collectors was Dennis Walker. He amassed a trove of sports memorabilia valued at nearly $10 million. Today, this irreplaceable collection is missing. Among the items in Dennis Walker's collection were Babe Ruth's ring, Mickey Mantle's uniform, Pete Rose's silver bat, and hundreds of priceless sports treasures. Number 3, the classic New York Yankees pinstripe. Sadly, this uniform is only a prop. Babe Ruth's real uniform, along with most of Walker's collection, is missing. America's national pastime has been robbed of a major portion of its history, and someone watching tonight may be able to help find it. In June of 1980, Dennis Walker quit his job teaching political science at a small Oregon college and set up an investment company in his hometown of Medford, Oregon. He concocted grandiose investment schemes and opened his own bank on the South Pacific island of Tonga. Walker offered an amazing 25% rate of interest, and indeed paid off early investors on schedule. More than 140 people gave Walker better than $7 million to invest.
He had the Midas touch. And word spread, because if somebody says, give me $10,000, and I will give you $12,500 right now, that sounds like one whale of an investment. The only thing is that he didn't actually give him $12,500. He gave them a piece of paper saying that he owed them $12,500 1 year from now.
Dennis, I have a few things I'd like you to sign.
Dennis Walker's employees also invested with him.
He seemed to be an astute business person, seemed to be very intelligent, and seemed to be very fair.
Topics that we cover there.
I was an investor, and I had a considerable amount of money with Dennis. We all trusted Dennis. I believe that every one of the employees had money invested with Dennis.
Walker had always been an avid baseball fan.
How you doing, Scott?
With his newly accumulated investors' money, he bought rare and expensive sports memorabilia.
Well, I just came in to see if you had anything new to show me today.
Oh, yeah. I got some new Mickey Mouse cards in.
It was as if he were acting out a childhood fantasy.
That's his rookie year, isn't it?
Yeah.
The first thing that Walker did was he spent a great deal of money on sports memorabilia.
$995.
Yeah.
What about that Willie Mays?
Sure have an eye for him.
$225.
Yeah.
They are some nice cards.
Walker had a passion for sports collectibles, and he freely indulged it with the investors' money.
To some degree, I felt that that was somewhat comforting because we had anywhere from $5 to perhaps $22 million worth of collectibles. Obviously, that's a rather large amount of assets, so the investors weren't too concerned.
Walker soon graduated from $1,000 baseball cards to the really major collectibles. He built one of the most prized collections in the country.
Major League batting champion, 1981. 370 average.
They're an absolute steal if I'd said to you this whole package at $12,000.
12,000.
That's right.
Walker leased an empty bank building in Medford, Oregon, and opened his very own Sports Hall of Fame. Pete Rose was Walker's special guest at the grand opening of his Hall of Fame. Walker had bought several pieces of memorabilia from Rose personally. He displayed them elaborately among his vast collection, which spanned 9 decades of sports history. Some of the most prized items were a pristine, uncut sheet of baseball cards from the year 1933, worth $10,000. 2 Honus Wagner baseball cards from the year 1910, valued at an incredible $70,000. The diamond-studded ring awarded to Pete Rose in 1984, the year he achieved 4,000 hits, valued at $30,000. And finally, a New York Yankees uniform worn by the great Babe Ruth.
Open up the door for us now?
In 1986, the Medford police obtained a warrant and searched Walker's office. The state of Oregon had been watching him for a year and had filed suit, charging him with fraud and racketeering. The search yielded enough evidence to prosecute Walker for the illegal sale of unregistered securities.
Here's some monetary amounts.
Once we had done that, then we ran into a brick wall as far as cooperation from the people who had invested their money.
The investigation was not a case where an investor did not get money or had complained to the state of Oregon. Everybody at that point was getting their principal interest, whatever it was that they required, to my knowledge.
Walker immediately filed a countersuit against the state, claiming his innocence. He received a number of summons, but continually failed to appear in court. Anticipating the state of Oregon would confiscate his assets, Walker asked Sandy Sanders, an employee, to pack up his prized sports collection.
Actually, I was all for getting it out of there so that it could be turned into liquid assets and be given back to the investors and to keep the state from getting their cotton-picking hands on it. Well, this is the last of it.
In April 1986, Walker decided to leave Oregon and took his entire collection of sports memorabilia with him. Most of Walker's collection would never be seen again.
Yeah, he's in here.
16 months later, a man registered under the name of Charles Lee was found dead in a Las Vegas motel. There was no apparent cause of death and no signs of identification except a prescription bottle bearing the name Dennis Walker.
From reviewing the autopsy photographs and the autopsy records and looking at the dental charts and records, there's no doubt in my mind that was Dennis Walker. There are a number of theories as to why he died, but no one has ever really been able to determine what caused his death. That, combined with the missing sports memorabilia, leaves many, many more questions open than closed in this case.
For every mystery, there is someone, somewhere, who knows the truth. Perhaps that someone is watching. Perhaps it's you.